right. Welcome everybody. It's a surprise live stream in more ways than one. Surprise, we're doing a live stream. Once again, no planning. Or planning on our end, just not planning on the YouTube end. Um, Welcome RJ, good to see you. Sorry we abandoned you mere minutes ago. Look, I'm back with everybody's favorite Latvian, Gustavs, who is here to bring up another topic for discussion. And he'd like to talk about surprise. Surprise embedded in surprise. It's very postmodern, self-referential. So, Gustavs, why don't you introduce the topic and like give me an idea of exactly what we're trying to work out here?
Yeah, so surprise, the experience of having something unexpected happen, of being destabilized, of being punched in the gut, those are all, I think, uh, instances of surprise. There's really, there's kind of positive surprise, negative surprise. There's things that are common to all of those instances. So, there's like a surprise party, for example.
Mhm.
But that, like, we kind of think of it as positive, but it generates a lot of emotions, and it destabilizes you. And I just thought surprise was interesting because it does a lot of stuff that is extraordinary, I would say, in life.
Mm. Yeah. No, I like this idea that surprises generally seem to be positive as a positive valence or something in pop culture or something. And yeah, it can also destabilize. And in some ways, like the birthday party, the surprise party for your birthday or something, is a destabilizing event. And that's what makes it fun and interesting to some extent. Right. But there's also the dark side of surprise if we want to if we want to get really silly about it, right? Where if you're on stable ground and then something happens to upset that, you don't quite know what to do, right? What to make of it, and so this might lead to such uh, well-known terms as domicide. Right? Hopefully not, but or something as banal as learning something, right? I mean, I think most learning is actually a function of surprise, right? Because there's stuff you know about the world, and then you learn more. That's an upsetting of the previous order. And when you have, we'll say, the positive idea of surprise, um, that then learning is good, right? Because you're like, oh, fun! I get to learn something. What am I going to learn today? I don't know what's going to surprise me today, right? But
Mm.
so, do you want to more explore this negative aspect? Because we don't. Because I agree that I didn't even think about it until you brought it up. Obviously, right?
I think actually one aspect I'd like to explore is the fact that I think in general, surprise as a thing is taken negatively in the age of gnosis that we live in, because it
Mm,
reveals that you weren't expecting something.
right.
And so even this kind of positive surprise party, or a gift, or some kind of let's say mercy being shown to you that you don't expect,
Mm,
people just reject it outright.
wow. Okay. Well, that thank you for tying in the age of gnosis. That ties in a bunch of things. Before I deal with that, RJ Peterson had a whole stump speech about surprise in a moral sense can be very bad. That's a good point, RJ. Thank you for adding that in. I agree. So I've got this thing that I've been working on. The video is recorded, hasn't been sent to the editor yet. Um, about the problems of video games, and then there's going to be a follow-up video to that about what I call the video game reality world. And so this plays right into that, right? So I'm so glad you went here. So let's just back up, and so in case anybody hasn't heard it yet, which I find hard to believe, but can always be the case. The age of gnosis is my framing for other people use the term modernity. I think that's a garbage word, and I have a whole video of that on navigating patterns you can check out if you don't believe me. I make a pretty good case there. So the age of gnosis is more like this idea that we're using knowledge as the highest value, and all knowledge is flattened or squished to propositions, so mere words or something. Whereas biblical knowledge is not, we'll say, X-rated knowledge. It's knowledge through participation, right? Through actually, having to live with somebody. That if you have a roommate, you're participating with them, whether or not you're doing other things. And it, if you go out and chop a tree, you're participating in chopping down a tree. You learn a lot of lumberjacking by lumberjacking. You don't learn any lumberjacking by talking about it, actually, right? Like that's maybe a precursor. It may be helpful, maybe useful, maybe required even, although I've got my doubts. But you don't actually gain knowledge from that. So that I think when you tie that into this video game problem, that video is going to come out eventually, hopefully next week, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Um, when you tie that into this video game reality problem that I've been talking about recently, which is just this idea that you've got this closed world, it's very easy to predict. Things work in a very specific way. All video games are linear, discrete systems, closed world systems. And so they're very flat views of reality. One of the problems that creates is that things are highly predictable in a way that they are not in the real world. And partly because we see patterns, and partly because hindsight bias is a thing we'd never catch ourselves doing, or almost never. We cast this very simplistic, logical, predictive structure onto the world that isn't actually there. We fool ourselves into thinking, "Oh yeah, we definitely predicted that," right? When in fact we absolutely did not see that coming, um, or the reasoning that we have for it is completely wrong, and what we're seeing is a side effect of something else, and thinking it's a quote primary cause. And so I think, yeah, in if if that's the case, if we're even if just knowledge of the world and therefore predictability of the world, which is implied by the knowledge, I know it's not the same thing, but it's implied, is an expectation, then when things don't go that way, and this is really good, right? Because that can just mean you didn't know how it worked before, but you thought you did. Right. So you had the system like, oh, well, definitely here's how elections work. And then one gets stolen, and you're like, what? And at first you're like, that's impossible because it doesn't fit your model. Um, and I think that that plays into like what you're talking about. So if you have a model of the world that you're relying on, and I think increasingly because individualism, which is an impossible condition, it's just we shouldn't even be talking about individuals because that's for things, not unique persons, which is a much better term for what they think they're referring to. But if you think you're an individual, you're trying to be an individual, you have to predict the world yourself. And so all the models that you need to survive need to be in your head. And that is an unbelievably high burden. It's much easier to
Yeah,
take
yeah,
it.
yeah. It's so if you are this person who is living in a model of the world in their head,
Yeah,
then when you're surprised, the surprise means that either you're insufficient in this world, in this model in your head, which is a humiliation, or it means that your model isn't good enough, which is
right,
also a humiliation, and also it kind of reflects on you, or it shows that this way of life, which is a person living in the model in their head, that's also wrong and bad and insufficient. And that's also a humiliation. So it's either of those three or all of them, and all of those things are like an attack on you. And so you just can't
right.
be surprised ever.
Yeah, no,
It's
I,
just not
I
a
that's
possibility.
right. Yeah, well, it's also dangerous, right? It's not merely a humiliation. If you
Hmm.
can't predict the world and the world has dangers in it anywhere, you're in a lot of trouble. And this is what I think when people are talking about worldview collapse, that seems to be what they're pointing at, right? Is like, yeah, it's not mere humiliation, it's also humiliation, right? But it's not mere humiliation, it's, man, I did not understand how this worked. I thought I was making correct predictions of the world, and I'm not. How many of my other predictions are not correct, right? Oh my goodness, right? That's your worldview collapse. What do I do about that? Like, oh, I don't know. What do you do? It's kind of a good question. Like, and it is. it is in the handling of that situation, which I think we all go through, which is another unappreciated thing. Like when you're told that, individuals can do certain things, like have models of the world and things like that, when they can't, the problem becomes twofold, right? Because if you can't do that, that's a problem for you. But if other people can't do that, that has huge implications to who you're listening to and why and what that means. And I mean, imagine talking to somebody who has a degree in computer science who has no idea what they're talking about, because that's happened to me way too many times. Right? And so that means you can't make sense of the world using other people, right? Or there's justification to some extent in being cynical and skeptical of expertise as such, right? So there's a couple problems wrapped up in that, not just the one. And I think some of them are unconscious, we'll say, right? Unconsciously, listen, your unconscious mind is smarter than your conscious rational mind. I'm just got to tell you that. Like it's more rational, oddly, and it's way smarter, and it's way more logical, and it's way more capable. And your unconscious mind knows it can't rely on itself, right? It knows it can't rely on your rational mind, and it knows it can't rely on itself. And so it knows that you need experts. Like you need to outsource some of that cognition. There's no question about it. So anytime you have this idea that you can figure that out for yourself, and you find out you can't, now you don't know who to listen to, but you have to listen to somebody still. Yeah, it sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
why the
think the
focus on
whole thing of
humiliation? Why the big
uh
focus on humiliation though?
well, it's like a at the spiritual level, I think humiliation is something like the opposite of, pride, and pride being sort of the highest sin or something like that, like pride being the source of becoming disconnected from the world, then humiliation is um kind of an attack on that, I think. Uh it's like a it's like a
Mm,
forceful submission of you to the world. And
mm.
I think that's yeah. If all sins descend from pride or something like that, then humiliation is like the the highest also kind of um, attack back on it or something like that. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
No. So I just want to see if I can reframe that a little bit differently. So I would
hmm
say when you're in the video game reality and you think you can model the world, we'll say reasonably enough or something. Um, Humility, which is a virtue, is a danger. Like it's like, oh no, because it's in direct contradiction to your idea that you can model the world, that you can sort of understand these things. And
hmm
then what what happens is, people will replace sort of simple rules of thumb, right, heuristics, for things. Like the other day, somebody basically told me, I pointed out to them all of Hegel's contemporaries were thought he was a clown, right? Because Hegel's a clown, by the way. He took, like, just read his stuff carefully enough, and you'll kind of see that Hegel's a bit of an idiot. He writes fancy, but actually, what he's writing is complete nonsense. And so his contemporaries knew this and wrote about it. And so if you read his contemporaries talking about Hegel, they're not very flattering. And somebody's response to this was, well, all these English philosophers that came after him, believed his stuff. And I was like, okay, I don't know any of these guys. That might be a hint how important they are and how useful their work is right there. I've heard of Hegel. I haven't heard of anybody that came after him. So I don't know, right? But they've substituted that in order to avoid the humiliation of maybe having trusted Hegel as an expert when in fact he's more of a idiot, to be quite honest. Really, like, read some of the nonsense he
well,
writes.
actually, I think this question of why I focused on humiliation, I think it's a really good question. Maybe it's because in this age of individualism and all this kind of stuff, our
Mm,
our foundation is this pride and
mm,
self-sufficiency,
right.
and so humiliation is a direct attack on that foundation of of where you are, of your self-sufficiency, and the surprise just reveals that you're not
Right,
sufficient.
and like, it's humiliation is the negative affect, of, um or the negative valence for humility. Right, which and
Hmm.
everybody talks about humility, but nobody displays any, right? That's one of those things. Everybody talks about it, and, boy, the number of people I know that, "Everybody needs more humility," and I'm like, "Yeah, but you need to start with you on that, because 'cause you're the worst offender on my Twitter feed anyway," you know? So, yeah, I think that's, that's actually really important. So the real question is, you know, why is humiliation bad? Right? Because it's sort of like that's sort of like the statement of something like forced humility, which I would argue is like good for you, like why are you this is why actually, you would know this, Gustavs. A lot of the viewers would may not know this. I actually rather enjoy it when I just, verbally assault somebody for their ethnicity or whatever, their gender or whatever silliness of the day I come up with, and then they fire right back. It's like a lot of fun, right? To go back and forth because it it's at some point just, you know, this humiliation and actually I use that as a tool. I mean, not to give away secrets, but I guess I'm going to give this one away. I use that as a tool all the time. Like if I insult your ethnicity, we'll say correctly, like with a stereotype that actually holds in the real world because it kind of holds up, and you don't cop to it, I think you get a humility problem, right? So it's a tell. I'm like, aha, that person, right? So I unfortunately I can't insult Latvia. It's too small a country and nobody knows anything about it. But if I could, the right, the response of the Latvian in particular, tells me a lot about that person, right? It tells me a lot about that person because you're, to some extent, revealing something about their identity that maybe they, shouldn't be proud of. And of course, Adam, if you ever watch my history talks, the Russian Revolution's coming out tomorrow, guys. Let's relax. It's here. I gotta prep it. But if you've ever seen Adam, Adam's extraordinarily good at this because he's Irish, and I have quite a bit of Irish in my tree, so I feel justified in insulting the Irish all over the place. And he usually cops to the things that he knows are Irish stereotypes. Yeah, fair enough. That's yeah, this is what it means to be Irish, right? And I do consider him quite a humble person. At the end of the day, he's remarkable in many ways. That Catholicism will do that to you. Wearing a crucified man on around your neck all the time really puts you in your place, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's this individualism that it's a real threat to individualism as such, or the concept of individualism. Uh, and to be humiliated is to kind of have that forced on you. But
It's
I
it's
think,
not it's non-consensual, which is not good in
right.
individualism either, right? It's this
Hmm.
there's just no other way to perceive it from an individualist perspective.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's non-consensual, and that's like the biggest sin in the Church of Individualism, if you want to think of it that way, which I think actually you should. And then for me, like I said, I like it when somebody goes after the French Canadians with a perfectly valid, because there's plenty of like show me the perfect culture, right? There's plenty of valid ways to go after French Canadians, believe me. Um, and I actually rather enjoy it, right? Like I think it's great. I think it's good to have these things contrasted, right? Because like when you're in your country, like if you go to Texas or something, right, you're just gonna hear pro-America stuff everywhere. Like, because they're just very, pro-gun, pro-America, pro-barbecue, kill stuff and burn it on a fire, and
Sounds good. Sign me up,
I well, you make a good Texan. You really would, actually. Yeah,
maybe.
if you came to the US, Texas would definitely be on the table. But if that's all you get, that's not good. I mean, the US has its downsides. I mean, we keep interfering in other countries for no apparent reason, and that's not great. And do stupid things in the Middle East and try to instantiate our idea of democracy, which is totally freaking wrong because we've deviated from the original idea of democracy, where we shut out all the suffrage people. It's like, you don't get suffrage. Go away. Suffer more. That's what you get. You can't vote. Piss off. You don't have any land. You can't vote. We've changed democracy into something closer to direct democracy, which of course the founders actually read the Greeks and knew was a bad idea, knew why. And so I think, I mean, a lot of this is, if you're an individual, that humiliation is purely negative, we'll say. It has a super negative valence in our society. But if you're not, if you're in this cooperation mode instead of this opposition mode, and it's a wonderful clip on Jonathan Peugeot's Clips channel, Symbolic World Clips channel, him talking to Jordan Hall. I think it was a number of
Yeah, that
years
was
ago
good.
now.
It was a good video. I saw it as well.
Yeah, it was a great little clip. I mean, this whole idea that we're wrapped up in this opposition all the time, and the question is, I've got the binary thinking, right? But the question is, where does some of this opposition come from? It comes from the individualism, because you're an individual in the world, disassociated, that causes the intimacy crisis, this individualism, right? It's one of the many main causes, or also might be a symptom, but that's a different video. So right, so you're disconnected, and then you lose the skills of cooperation, right? You lose the skills of, well, how do we get along? Like, how do we joke about our ethnicity in a way that's positive for us, instead of something that's constant a battle, right? A constant one-upmanship, right? And then that is a that's a good question, but that's what causes the opposition, because it's you against the world if you're an individual. And I don't recommend it, but like that's I see that everywhere. So is that more what you're keying in on with this humiliation
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
idea?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. It's just you can't stand it. And I think another thing that goes with this is that when you're surprised, right? It's like, um, and maybe this is for me because I'm trying to get out of this age of gnosis stuff, and
Mm.
and and maybe I'm not quite out of it yet, right? But when you're surprised, the quality of being surprised um seems to be more important, or like more primary to me, than the goodness of the surprise, or whether it's a good thing, right?
Mm.
And I think that sense of priority, like, first of all, when you're surprised, it's you have a short time, I guess, to like make a judgment about whether the surprise is a nice or a bad thing. Because when you're surprised, at least for me, I very often go into a kind of defensiveness mode, or like I need to think for a second about whether I actually like this and things
Yeah.
like that. And if you can't tell whether something is good or bad, it's you can't actually accept something as good. You just have to reject the new thing altogether. You have to pretend you don't see it, for
Right.
example, or you can just leave. And I think there's something in that. Is that, you know
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So let me see if I can do this in multiple. Well, let's use my three
Hmm.
frames format, right? So you with yourself, right? So in that frame, uh, surprise can be a problem, because again, you have to model the world, and the world can be dangerous, right? Whether you sort of feel that rationally or not. And then, one of the sort of issues with that is that can easily contain a negative component, right? Because one of your models is wrong. And in the age of gnosis, you don't like being wrong, because being wrong is a sin if knowledge is the highest value, right? Like, knowledge is the highest value and you screwed it up. That's bad, right? And then that also, so that's your internal view. Your external view, you with others, that's also bad in the eyes of others. So showing surprise now becomes a show of weakness or sin, or both, um, because sin and weakness are closely associated anyway. And so now you've got a social problem, right? So you've got a personal problem, worldview collapse, things like that. We talked more about that earlier, right? And then you've got a social problem with others, right? And then the you with the nature is, well, you thought you knew how nature worked, and you thought that you were safeguarding yourselves against the nature, but in fact, the nature has done something unexpected, right, outside of your model view. And I think, to your point, when we're focused on, we'll say, information or knowledge and things like that, um, we get into the more is better, right? We get into the splitting things up, like what information, right? We're not in the higher frame, right? Which is good and bad. And so, if I'm in my house and I see a spider on the floor and I get surprised, which happens, uh, the context tells me immediately what to do. So, personal admission, if I'm in my house and these wolf spiders are huge, and a wolf spider is in the house, this hasn't happened in a while, by the way, but it has happened. And I run across the wolf spider, or he moves or something, and I notice him. Uh, the first thing I do is jump. Right now, now, if Sarah is around and there's a wolf spider in the house and I see it, I kill it immediately. Immediately, right? Because
Are wolf spiders like dangerous, poisonous, or something?
no, no, but they're big and fuzzy, and they
Okay.
could eat you. It looks like they could eat you. You got to understand, Gustav. See, you see a spider, and we'll say it's we'll say this big to you. That's not how big the spider is, right? Because my brain tells me that spider is slightly larger than my car. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yep.
the fact that you don't see the world correctly, I can't really help you with that. All I can say is, right, but it's the context. And now, if I see a wolf spider in my house, most times what I will do is one of two things: either I try to move it outside, because I don't want to kill anything. Because it's not my thing. Or I will let it go hide somewhere. I'll be like, dude, like, go, scooch, go eat whatever you're eating in my house, which I want you to eat. Just don't be in the halls. Like, just don't, like, go hide, because they are harmless. Now there are poisonous spiders here and snakes. I did once have a snake in my house, which was quite surprising. That was not good. That's definitely a scream went out when the snake appeared. Um, but to your point, like, how should you deal with this? Well, for me, the context tells me the good or bad thing to do. And normally the good thing to do is not to squish the spider. Like, that's actually not my first consideration. And also, whether or not my surprise results in, like, a jerk or a start is entirely determined on context. Like, some things surprise me, and I just kill them immediately. Like, where'd you come from? Squish. I don't even think about it. But that's because I'm me, and I have very specially honed, ways of dealing with the world. I wanted to know, though, Gustav, what you thought of this Anselman comment, because Anselman makes excellent observations. Humiliation is is a tool of Est-like cults and army drill sergeants. I don't know. I mean, I think humiliation is more like something that happens to you as the result of your negative or positive valence. But what did you think, Gustavs?
I I guess I see what Anselman's saying, but I don't think it's such a bad thing. I think it's I think when you're when you're a grunt, when you're a in training at the army, like maybe you need to be put in your place.
Right. And I mean, I don't mind thinking of it as a tool. I just don't think it's a negative tool. And I think
Hmm.
it will happen when it's not a tool. That's my problem with casting it as a tool. Like, it can be a tool. I mean, I would say to some extent that's how online trolls get attention, is through humiliation. It's not their only tool, but that is, I would say, they use humiliation as a tool to get attention. That, I think, is a
Hmm.
totally fair way uh, to think about it.
Yeah,
I'm just
and the thing is that, like, inappropriate or excessive humiliation towards someone, by like a boss towards an employee, it's really transparent to people, and it just doesn't work at some point, and that changes
Right,
it clearly.
exactly. It's not a very reliable tool because, yeah, if you if you well, and there is that other distinction again because there's 3 frames, that I like to use. You can see that video on navigating patterns. Um, there is that, idea that humiliating somebody privately and humiliating them publicly are different things, and that comes up a lot. I mean, I kinda hate to use this example, but actually I think it's a really good one. So we could talk about, that guy Calvin Robinson online, who is this Anglican, uh, priest, and then he eventually got defrocked, but before he got defrocked, he got, warned privately, like, "You need to tone it down, you need to kinda be careful," and that was sort of a private humiliation, and then when he transgressed the second time, apparently, like, I don't have all the facts, I wasn't there, neither were any of you, so, don't be telling me I'm wrong because you don't know that, right? You you like, this is the report, and I'm going by what was reported, and also by how these things almost always work. Like, I mean, there are exceptions, but organizations usually pull you aside privately and say, "Cut the shit," before they go after you publicly. But then eventually they did go after publicly. Like they very publicly said, "No, you did this, and now we have to make a statement, and you're this is horrible." And like I think that process is necessary. Those layers are necessary because there are sort of three frames, and people are wielding that ability to humble other people or to try to humble other people as a tool. And I mean it's an important distinction. So I'm glad that Anselman brought it up.
Yep.
Did you have any other of these comments you wanted to address?
Well, there's quite a few of them, and they're very good tonight. Uh, I do appreciate that.
So some of them
Uh,
I think are good, yes. Obviously, the ones I highlight I think are great.
so, what did you think of this idea of a surprise having making you make a snap judgment, and that
Mm,
being a real challenge as well?
right. So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's an interesting thing to bring up. I think the issue there is this is what stoicism is about, right?
Mm,
Stoicism is about training your passions, and part of your passions is a surprise, right? Your reaction to unexpected events in the moment. And so, normally, especially when I'm out in public, if I'm out in public and I see a spider, nothing happens at all, except usually I'll just squish it, right? Because I'll just intuit that other people might not be comfortable with the spider. And I've done that before and gotten yelled at. You didn't need to kill the poor little spider, and I'm like, screw you. Like I am protector, and you will be protected, right? Whether you like it or not. And I've said that to people too because I'm not shy. You might have noticed. Uh, and that is markedly different from how I act at home for sure, because I have different identities. I don't wanna kill spiders, but if I think it'll benefit others, I'll just kill the damn spider because I know where the priorities lie and where they're important, right? That's roughly relevance realization, right? Importance. And I think I get that from the Stoicism. I think that the
mhm,
step back and think, consider your surroundings very carefully, right? Place. I mean, the other thing I think Stoicism at least holds at bay. I don't think it solves it or anything, but it holds it at bay. Is domicide, right? Because in order to be a Stoic, if you take it seriously enough, you will find a way to ground yourself, and that grounding will at least prevent you from, we'll say, further domicide, no matter how domicided you are in the moment, right? You can be homeless, completely rejected by your family, right? Living on the streets, like actually starving, right? And if you're stoic, at least you're not going to get worse. right? It's not solving your problem, right? Stoicism does not solve problems, but it does to some extent arrest the downward spiral, and that's why I actually like it. Um,
Mm,
so yeah, see you, Anselman. Thanks for stepping in. But yeah, I mean, I think that's important to how you deal with it. And because surprise to me is just, in my head and whatever. We're this is a live stream. Like we're it's the first time I thought about this really in this way. Um, so I could be completely off base, but for me, it's part of the passions. Like that's actually where it lives.
mhm. Yeah, it could be. I I think this, yeah, the stoicism is really helpful. You know, the image of the stoic is of the rock, right, or of the flowing water that just flows around everything. You know,
Right.
it's
Right.
this thing that's totally resistant to change, but also totally changeable and all that kind of stuff. But I I think because I had this thought about the snap judgments and about how you have to make them, is that
Mm,
first of all, yeah, having to make that snap judgment is difficult for a lot of people, and so they either reject, yeah, the surprise itself, you know, the thing,
right.
and you kind of double down on your mental cloud castle that you live in, fancy castle in the sky, or you assume that the surprise is negative, right? And this is, I think, kind of a safe option actually, pretty much, is that you accept it, but you treat it as a threat, right? Which is kind of reasonable. I had this quote in my head, which is from the Dark Knight Rises, about the Joker's quote about how when things don't go according to plan, everyone loses their mind.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's the surprise of something being unexpected, like, and the Joker's point was that even if things, like, terrible things are happening, you know, destruction and demolition, all these things, if it's according to plan, people are fine with it.
Yep. Right. Right. Yeah. It's just the um, invalidation of the frame.
Hmm.
A lot of people get very upset when things that were chaotic get quiet, and they invoke things like the calm before the storm. And it's like,
Hmm.
well, what was before the calm, right? Because in order to sense the calm, because you need contrast to see, there must have been something there that wasn't calm. Fair enough. And then you're anticipating a storm as the result. And so it might not be, but it could be a return to storm from storm, and a lull in the middle. And that I think is, super super important. And I did want to highlight, oh, RJ's got to run. That's no good. Being grounded certainly helps deal with the surprise, but being grounded is not to be in expectation. Yeah, and
Mm.
you insist it's prettily worded, but I got exactly what you mean, RJ. Yeah, um, because we think in binaries, we think like grounded or ungrounded, and then we assign all these properties to being grounded. Grounded doesn't mean you can make good predictions about the world. Grounded means you don't have to, which is way better, actually. Right? It's like, oh, if something unexpected happens, my community that I cooperate with will help me, and therefore whatever danger or whatever cost to be paid will be mitigated by those other people, right? And this is more what it means to be in community. And of course, now we're getting way out on a limb, and and I do have to reel it back and not reveal too much. Maybe that'll make it into the book on community, since I'm not quite done yet, but I should be shortly. Um, and I think that's actually really important, right? Is this idea that, yeah, when we talk about groundedness, we're not talking about more knowledge or better access to experts or any of that nonsense. It is the thing that makes those things less necessary, right? So you don't need to rely on them as much, we'll say, and I think that's actually super important. So I like RJ's point here. It's really excellent point. It's too bad he had to go. It's too bad he didn't jump in with some of this too. But maybe he'll be done soon and he can come back. We'll find out. So yeah, what do you think of that, Gustavs? Because yeah, you resonated with it. Seems like the same way I did.
Yeah, I really like the second part of the sentence, that being grounded is not to live in expectation. It means that you kind of feel like you have what you need for the time being, and if you have what you need for the time being, um then the surprise doesn't rock you, because it
There's no
well,
same impact.
unless the surprise is that the ground falls out beneath your feet,
Right,
and
right, sure, sure, right.
then that's really that's disruptive, totally disruptive. That just destroys your everything.
Right, but that goes back to the video game reality thing I was talking about earlier. I will make a video on video game reality. Don't you worry. This is going to take me a little while to do it. Yeah, I mean the idea that you have models in your head that you've developed sort of as this quote individual, which is still impossible. And yes, I'm going to repeat that as a mantra because it's super important. This impossible idea that you're an individual and that you have this model in your head is, not necessarily, we'll say, um, different from self-grounding, right? And I think that's also why Jonathan Peugeot, I don't actually like this, but he talks a lot about identity. And I'm like, well, your identity is assigned, not assignable, right? Like you can't give it to yourself. And um I mean, that's, to some extent, that's how I opened the stream. That's how I assigned you an identity. Against your will, to some extent.
Mm.
Although we did discuss it first. I wasn't totally tyrannical about it, we'll say. Um, but that's why, right? Like if you're self-grounded, if you're grounded in the video game reality, then A, you can self-identify, and B, you have to, because in an intimacy crisis, how are people going to know who and what you are? Right? Because if you're self-determining, if you're an individual, if you're apart from the world, other people need to know how to interact with you. And if you're not following a predetermined set of rules, something like a politeness and etiquette framework, right, that we all share in common, then yeah, I mean, I agree. Now identity is a big problem where it was never before, right? But it's a made up problem. It's a created problem by individualism. Without the individualism, the identity problem vanishes, sort of immediately. And the thing is, like, you're a person who is connected to yourself, to other persons, and to nature. Like you were dropped into a pre-existing creation. You have no choice about that. Like you are dependent upon it. Like you're not dependent upon it. You still have to breathe air, right? You still have to like interact with the sun. Hopefully, everybody's getting out and getting sun now that the sun's better. You still have to use, to some extent, the stars and the weather to determine when to plant crops. Otherwise, you can't grow food and it's harder to eat. It's not impossible, but it's harder to eat, right? You have to track animals, or you have to kill animals, you have to cook animals, right? All these, you're dependent on all those things. Like they're not optional, right? They're dependencies. They're hard dependencies you can't get rid of. In the video game reality, you can get rid of them because you kind of have to, because once you find out how many people it takes to build a video game and then, uh, you know, well, we'll say conceptualize video game, then write the video game, then make sure it actually gets written and is successful, because there's lots of video games that never get off the ground, right? And then run the damn thing, and distribute it so that people have it. You're dependent on a lot of people, a lot of
Yep.
unknown people. You have no idea how many people that is. It's a lot. It's a real lot. And when they screw up, you get all smug about it. Oh, there's a bug in this game. Oh. I was like, I don't know. I don't know if you should be so smug about that, but RJ says Manuel stumbling stone. Yeah, well, stumbling stone is a big problem, especially with grounding. So, yeah, I mean, I think this idea of being surprised, being negative, is very much a sign that we're disconnected from the world that we were born into. And that's
Mm.
why people like Heidegger, the Nazi, maybe don't follow the philosophy of a Nazi. I don't know. just my rule of
Mhm.
thumb. Like you can follow other rules of thumb. Who said thrownness? And I was like, that's the least interesting choice of making up a new word for something we already understand perfectly well that I've ever heard. Like this is what I would call peak stupidity. Uh, Are you saying we were born in a time and place, apparently, although not provably, uh, not of our choosing? Is that what you're saying? Because I already knew that because it already happened to me and everybody that I know. But I guess you need to make up a word for that. I guess you can, but I'm gonna look at you a little funny and sort of back away slowly and think you're a lunatic because you're definitely a lunatic. Yes,
So
sorry.
I think is that a big anxiety for people and society in general is that we have made decisions and that we are continuing to make decisions that have costs that will catch up to us.
Mm, right. Right.
And so we're going to get our I don't know, just desserts or something. And there's a lot of that catching up sort of happening. You know, we have
Mhm.
we have for example the whole idea of man-made climate change, that being a thing, that we've
Yep.
industrialized and we've lived this wonderful, whatever. We have stuff
Yep.
now, and now, there's this cost to it that has been imperceptible and is going to catch up to us. And
Right.
there's this anxiety that by continuing to make decisions, we're continuing to make these hidden demons, monsters that are lurking and just
Mm.
waiting to, you know,
Yeah.
accumulating. They're also growing, and we
Right.
don't see them until it's too late, or something like that. Like I
Right.
I think that's a relevant pattern to nowadays as well. And
Mhm.
and there's a total certainty that there are these externalities, there are these costs that we don't see, and that we will be surprised by them, and that is also a source of anxiety, right? That we will be surprised at them at some point
Right.
in the future.
Right, right, and I have a video on trade-offs on navigating patterns, of course, which sort of deals with some of this, and I wanna kinda carry that back, so, um,
Hmm.
some forms of anxiety are due entirely to a mismatch between your unconscious understanding of the world and your conscious understanding of the world. Like Freud and Jung knew this well. I don't know why we've thrown that part of their work out lately and we'll say recent psychology, but no one's talking about this. It's fantastically important. And I think sort of the issue there is that um, unconsciously we know there are trade-offs. We know there are consequences. Like we're well aware of the fact that there are costs to these things that you know um that that we're doing stuff and it's not disconnected. And so at some point those connections will become apparent to us and it will surprise us, right? How? And then when we try to predict it, we get it wrong. Like, we predict climate change and then none of those predictions come through, right? They're all way the hell off and not even close. Um, and so yeah, I think you're right, but I think that anxiety is born from the cognitive dissonance, the internal cognitive dissonance, not the external cognitive dissonance, which is different between the unconscious modeling of the world, which is far better than your conscious modeling of the world, and your conscious modeling of the world. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, it makes total sense, and there's like there's a rejection or something of the unconscious to some extent. It's like we have to be super rational and everything has to make sense, and
Right.
where we are aware of everything, we can make rational judgments about ourselves, we can consent and all these kinds of things. That's a big feature. And so not only is the unconscious and the emotional and all of that sort of uh I would say like disrespected or something. It's
Mm.
totally, it's kind of being
Ignored maybe is better, not disrespected.
delegitimized or ignored or
Mm.
just denied.
Right.
And
Right.
and so and so that also does tend to materialism. So let's say, for example, in the case of industrialization and then climate change. So in during industrialization, people would not have said that climate change would be a cost, right? There's lots of other
Right.
costs, but people would not have said climate change. The mechanisms are just too, they're too far reaching. It's like, yeah, okay, specifically carbon dioxide, and then that has some kind of wavelength thingy that we don't know about even for another, for a while, and then that does stuff and it'll build up like what the, it's
Mm.
it you can people could not rationally predict climate change from the industrialization. But if people
Right.
had faith that there's going to be a spiritual trade-off at the spiritual level, that's like a pattern of reality, that there will be a not semi-equal trade-off, but kind of the cost will come back to bite us. That maybe
Right.
what we have is something that is actually too good to be true.
Right. Right. Well, and that's actually a really good example. So, in one of the more fascinating patterns that I've recognized for decades now, actually, well, surprised when people don't talk about it. Maybe they don't see it. I don't know. Right? It's always worried. Really, nobody sees this. Uh, um, Industrialization in England was horrific. I mean, it was pollution wise. Oh my goodness. We have some of these well-known tales like Charles Dickens told and stuff for a reason, right? And that reason is the horrors of the pollution of the industrialized uh, England, right? Industrialized city. And in the United States, those things, as near as I can tell, are actually much more popular pieces of literature for some, even though they don't even apply. Like, none of that happened in the United States to anywhere near that extent. It's just we didn't have that problem. The reason why we didn't have part of the reason why we didn't have the problem is because England wrote about it, and we were like, well, we don't want to do that part of it. We don't mind a little industrialization, but we don't want all the pollution. And so we very much sort of, if you want to phrase it in these terms, took that sin on our shoulders, and we've been trying to
Mm,
like over environmentalize in this country since
mm,
the industrial revolution in the United States. But one of the side effects of that is that a lot of the industrialists um, did strange things. Like uh, they're the ones that sort of supported the national park system in the United States. They would set aside reserves in contracts held to this day from the 1800s, basically in the United States, where that land cannot be built on ever. Can't have anything built on it. Not even a house in some cases. In some cases, you can have small things, but right there's whole like recreation parks around the city of Lowell, which is the home of the Industrial Revolution in the United States, that they're going to be parks forever. Now the government may or may not have violated some terms of that contract and put a school in one of them. That may or may not make me very angry, but by and large, they actually do follow some of the trusts are still around, right? They're still well funded because those guys were wealthier than Elon Musk. All the so-called robber barons, which were neither robbers nor barons, were wealthier than Elon Musk individually. Like they all in adjusted dollars and stuff. They all did that. But the other thing they did, and this is a fascinating story. I learned something. The History Channel had a series called "The Men Who Built America." Like absolute must watch because that's all about the Industrial Revolution and the aftermath of it. And what happened was the John Rockefeller, right, the oil tycoon who started Standard Oil, was at one of the wells, and there was this stuff leaking on the ground. And he's a fairly conscientious person, actually. And so, I mean, you can read this two ways, obviously, because it has an inevitable side effect, which is, why are we wasting things? Like, why can't we find a way to sell it? And that prompted the invention of gasoline, right? Instead of kerosene, which oddly where he got his start in standardizing kerosene and saving thousands of lives every year. But he was one of the greatest environmentalists in the world, ultimately, even though he was the wealthiest man single man that has lived in, we'll say, recent times, because oil saved the whales, right? He standardized kerosene, and then when the oil wells were spewing out, random stuff, he's like, no, no, clean that up and sell it, right? And so he prevented a bunch of waste from leaking in, leaking into and destroying wells and water wells and who knows what else, right? Destroying the environment. So the whole idea of refining is actually kind of Rockefeller, at least in terms of petroleum like products like kerosene. So this can be a very a very useful way to think about it. We sort of learn from England.
Mhm.
We don't make those mistakes,
Yep.
right? But we still have this anxiety, we'll say unconsciously, around. Well, we're still doing stuff in the world, and we really don't know. We don't pull on that string. You don't know what it's attached to, right? Like
Well,
it's still
well,
that
well,
that sense.
like this train of thought that I I cannot predict the consequences, therefore there will be no consequences. That's a very kind of like it's a
Mm.
comforting. It's a
Mm.
it's a direction of thinking that's it's comforting. You're comforting yourself. I didn't know this would happen. It's not gonna happen, and I'm sure of it. Like maybe you're
Right,
wrong.
right. Yeah, I think that's true. I think especially if you're, we'll say, over your cognitive capabilities, not even your cognitive load, but your cognitive capabilities, your tendency is going to be to discount, we'll say, difficult things. And difficult things are definitely, things you can't easily predict, or all by definition difficult. But even just the idea of having to predict them is difficult. And so when you're cognitively overloaded already, you're not going to go through that trouble, right? And now, yeah, maybe you shouldn't. Like I think there's a there for sure, but is that the right answer, right? Because that's where that's like, maybe you need to pay, right? And this gets back to this, Dr. Vervaeke relevance realization idea, which is really just a fancy way of saying importance. Um, uh, what is the importance of learning the consequences of one thing versus another? And that, I think, goes back to grounding, right? Like, well, it's not important if if I understand this, because I can just listen to my parents, or to a trusted advisor about this, and not, sort of waste my time thinking about it, right? So I think all of that is pretty much supremely important.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's how do I want to put this? I think I think there is a kind of a faith that you can have, or you can hold with integrity to the idea that if you act in bad faith, there will be bad outcomes. And so it's a really but even if you act in good faith, there will also be externalities and mistakes and so on.
Right, right.
And so people get uh tripped up in that quite a lot because they can see the bad things are happening, and then they you know that's the only way they can judge whether things have been done well, whether things have
Mhm.
been executed well, you know, and it leaves this free room of people acting in bad faith and with bad intentions.
Right. Well, I would say that goes back to two related problems. One is, and I think this is kind of clear to see because the discussion's happening all the time. Nobody knows what faith is anymore. They don't understand its relationship in the world, right? Which is why they don't have a definition for it. But also, nobody understands good versus bad. So when I try to explain to somebody why it is, it takes me literally 2 seconds to figure out if someone's in good or bad faith, at least from their perspective. It's usually I've done my research and they have done none. Um, they don't get it. They're like, well, I don't understand how that can help you determine good and bad faith. And I'm like, really? Like, what? Wow. I'm always like gobsmacked by that. Like, I just explained it to you. Like, what part of this is confusing? Because I got nothing. Like, if you don't understand, how to tell if someone's in good faith. Like, wow, like I don't know what to do for you. Like, I don't know how to help you. It seems like a deficit too. Like, wow, do you need to know that? Like, and so these conversations are always good faith, hey, because you're explicitly exploring, right? And beyond asking you roughly what the topic is, I pretty much come in unprepared, right? And the reason why I come in unprepared is, I mean, this is very deliberate, right? Because to prepare means I would be framing the discussion to some extent. Now, I don't, obviously, I prepare videos all the time. Like, I have no problem framing things. It's like, talk to me for 4 seconds. You'll realize I have a frame and I'm going to impose it, right? But not in these conversations, because that's not what these are. And these are pure exploration of a topic. And I don't want to impose, and it's, no offense, Gustavs, it's not for you. It's like, I mean, you benefit from it. And I'm not doing that for you. I'm doing that for me, because you're I mean, we're different ages. We live in very different places. You have very different experiences from me, right? Growing up and stuff. You speak other languages. I can barely get out an English sentence on a good day, right? Obviously, we have different things we've read and encountered, and you have different struggles, right? And you're very bright, so I learn from you, and that's harder to do if I pre-frame these conversations. Like, that is not the purpose. Now, because I do that, I hope that you also get, we'll say, more out of it than you would otherwise. That's impossible to measure, right? Like, I could easily make an argument that no, if I frame this better, I could, show Gustav something that he definitely couldn't see, on a free form exploration. That may even be true. I don't know, but the imposition is a lot of work, and quite honestly, I'm lazy sometimes. So, and this is really, your project. This is your project, not mine. I'm just, really trying to facilitate and help you out. But
Thank you for that. Thank you.
you're you're welcome. No, thank you, because it's good. It's good for me. I do learn stuff every time we do this. So, and we've done this, not on video. We'll say many times, just exploring these topics. I mean, that's what we do on the Mark of Wisdom Discord server all the time. Is just like, it's not constant or anything, but like, it comes up all the time. And people mention something, and so I don't really understand this. I never realized until today that I didn't have a grasp on this concept or this term or this word, right? And that exploration is important, but not framing it. It also means, to the point, I won't be surprised. I won't be humiliated, because I'm not coming in with an expectation. And so I don't have an expectation that I'm going to be able to show you something you didn't see. I don't have an expectation that, my worldview is not going to get changed, because I hope it does. Like, my expectation is that I'll learn something from you. Right. And from the comments, RJ and Manuel always make good comments. And so that's super helpful. Right. So to me, like, at some level, unless it's like a silly, like I was mentioning earlier, like an attack on French Canadians as such, I can't be humiliated in this conversation, because it's not set up that way. It's set up as an exploration, as a pure exploration. I mean, I think this is what Peterson's hinting at when he says play. And he usually denotes rough and tumble play, which obviously fantastically important, like 100% agree. But then John Vervaeke talks about it in terms of serious play. I think that's a nonsense way to talk about it. I think the way adults play should be just talked about in terms of pure exploration. And this is the worst form, we'll say, even though obviously I think we both find these very helpful, because this is just a pure exploration in thought. Which, it's got some relevance. Obviously, I wouldn't do it, right? It's not necessarily bad, but it can stray bad easily. But I think that's a mode of exploration, and men are really good at this type of exploration, by the way. So, I think it's a good thing for us to do in general.
So yeah, that's I've heard some nice things there. Thank you. But going back to surprise, there's this thing that's happened, which is the Peterson sphere exploding or arriving
Mm,
in the world, right?
right.
And
Mm,
that's a big thing, and it's taken a lot of people by surprise. A lot of
yeah.
established people in institutions. I see this
Mm,
in church a lot. I see it in not just church, but kind of intellectual people and so on. There's a bit of there's a rejection of it, whatever it is, right? Which I'm, you know, whatever it is, it's something. It's happening. It's taken the world by storm. It's a surprise, and lots of people are just rejecting it straight up, and
right. Right.
they aren't engaging with it. They aren't exploring it. They don't have a very good. Well, sometimes they have some kind of reasoning for it, for the rejection and for the snobbishness against it or something, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
that's definitely a pattern as well, and I feel like I'm in the Peterson sphere. I've been taken over by it, and I'm still exploring what it is and where it comes from, and where it's
Right.
going. And so for example, another instance of this happening is that, my gosh, what the Peugeots have brought to us, in terms of biblical understanding, is way beyond anything I was taught through my, years and years and years in Sunday school. Exactly, that book. I love it. Years and years of just going to church and Sunday school and all of this stuff. And it's like, it's something totally different, and people are rejecting it.
Mm-hmm.
I've People are rejecting it. I try to sometimes, in various ways, get people to engage with Peugeot stuff, and nobody wants to, actually, which
Right.
is bizarre to me. It's bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah, because you've gotten so much out of it. So I'm gonna pull this back. I love where you're
Yeah.
going with. That was fantastically unexpected. I didn't ever imagine that we would get here. But I like that you kind of scaled up on the fractal set of reality there. Um, the I think when people have these nice, comfortable models of the world in their head, as we mentioned earlier, and they don't want to upset them, the reason why they don't accept something new burgeoning inside their model is cognitive overload. It's not just danger. It's like, man, I just can't track one more thing. And so, Gustavs, you kind of know this. Uh, we were kind of prepping for this, and I had to go out in the other room and get some tea and prepare. Right, like I don't just do these things. I got to have a little bit of preparation. I got to set up the office and everything, but I had to go out of the office and like prepare prepare my drinks and stuff. And Sarah says to me like, "Oh yeah, well there's these things we can do when we go out to Vegas." And I'm like, "Not not right now." Like I get it, but like also I have to wind down from that and like because the cognitive overload is a problem. Like I can't. I don't. I need to kind of focus on I mean, just I think this is where meditation or meditation like practices are helpful, right? Just preparing to be open is effort. Like it's yes, I have to quiet my mind. Yes, I have to bring my thoughts down. I have to stop framing a bunch of stuff because I'm going to come into this exploratory conversation about a topic that honestly, I don't sit around and go, "What do we think about today, Mark?" I know, surprise. That doesn't happen, right? And so, I had to kind of do that, and here I am getting bombarded with something that honestly I don't need to worry about right in that moment. And obviously, she was all like, in the middle of research, and I'm like, "Can I just not talk to you about this right now? Maybe like after dinner, or like." After my live stream later tonight at 7 p.m. on navigating patterns, like, can we just not? Can we not right now? Right? Because it was just cognitive overload at some point, and I think that's part of it. And if it's a threat, now you have a new threat to understand and deal with, and incorporate or just incorporate into your worldview. Like, let's suppose it's not a threat. Let's just suppose like, oh, the Peterson sphere is good because I'm a church guy and I think more people going to church is good, and it seems like Peterson's doing that, and therefore, we'll just compress it and reduce it down, right? Assume there's no bad aspects to the Peterson sphere. and say, this is good. I don't need to worry about it. I don't need to deal with it because it's good. Um, and you know, I think that's completely ridiculous, but I'm sure people are doing it, right? Because peopling and stuff. Which I'm not a fan of peopling, but it doesn't seem the solution to it anyway. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's this aspect where what do you do with something like that? How do you integrate it into your worldview, even if it's not a negative for you? Like, because there was the church planter movement, and this is just the church planter movement, again, or but this is Billy Graham, 2.0, or whatever, right? There's lots of ways to kind of think about this, without engaging. But I think the problem when you bring up symbolism is where you've got the deep Protestant roots, where symbolism is one of the things they took out explicitly. Like that's
Mm.
iconoclasm removes symbolism. It removes the interaction with symbolism, and therefore, according to our thesis, see the model engine videos. I've got a live stream and a video on the knowledge engine. Um, it removes your ability to poetically inform the world. And when you can't do that, you can't make, we'll say, proper connections in the world. And so that contributes back to the thing we talked about earlier, which is the individualism, right? And possibly the materialism and objectivism. But and that's all intimacy crisis stuff. Like you don't have this proper connection to the world, right? And of course, right? So you participate pretty regularly in the book club here for the language creation by Mathieu Peugeot, which is obviously an excellent book. That's why we're doing a book club on it. Actually, we'll be doing that tomorrow, I believe. So good for us. Run by the incomparable Emmanuel Post, who does an excellent job of hosting that for us. You found a lot of help with that, with understanding or having a deeper understanding of the biblical text and some of the connections that can be made in there that you didn't see before, because that's basically what the Peugeot brothers are about, is symbolism. And I argue that symbolism requires this poetic information, right? And making these, we'll call them complex connections or multivariate connections, many to many relationships. And then once you engage with these many, many relationships, then you have a richer world. And of course, you want to share that with everybody, right? Because
Yeah.
that skill can reduce their anxiety, actually, right? Because once you can connect a bunch of things together, we'll say you don't need a causal chain of 10 things anymore. You just need one symbolic thing and it connects all the 10 things. And that actually
Well, and
reduces your anxiety.
it's not just about having a richer world myself and then having like wanting other people to also have a richer world. It's also that I want to share a world with other people, and
Right.
and I think
Right.
that's even more important. It's not this, kind of just altruism. It's like a
Yeah.
it's like a sharing of life.
No, I like that. Yeah, sharing of life. Yeah, I mean, so basically, you don't want to use the book to oppose someone else's biblical interpretation. You don't want to do this opponent processing thing, which again goes back to the clip that on the Symbolic World Clips channel that we both watched. You don't want to
Mhm.
use it as a cudgel or as a stand for you to take in righteousness or something. You want to use it as a way to connect with other people and cooperate with them and show them a bigger, better world or something, right? Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, well, often I arrive in situations where I kind of either have, to some degree, the book's been so influential on me that sometimes I feel like I have to choose between this richer world and sharing a world with other people because they're in, I don't know,
Right.
some kind of materialism, for example, and and there's just, it seems ridiculous often sometimes talking with people.
Yeah. So one of the things that's going to come out in my video game video is you have to join their video game.
Yeah.
Like, the only reason I played World of Warcraft was because I want to hang out with my friend, and he, despite living down the street, didn't want to have me over, basically. So,
Hmm.
it is that separation. So I had to go into his video game, which I mean, I don't mind World of Warcraft, like whatever, but also, I mean, I never spent that many hours in it because I was always like, oh, well, I got code to write, or I could go off and play tennis or whatever. There's a ton of things that I used to go sailing, right? Just go for a drive in the convertible with the top down. Like all of these things were competing with World of Warcraft, and yeah. But if I wanted to hang out with him and just talk to him and find out how his day went and stuff, he was only available in these video games. Like I was, it's kind of sad, right? And his skill of, it's funny too because he's a very charismatic person, actually, but he's very lazy about going out and meeting people. Anytime he goes anywhere, he gets along with people great. He just doesn't socialize well, which is a really weird combination for sure. And he's not the kind
Yeah,
that will reach out to you either, right? He's not the kind that will call
that's
you
very
up.
unusual. That's
It is it is unusual. I collect unusual people, Gustavs. Hopefully you're not one of them, but or maybe you are in all the best ways or something. But yeah, uh, but but that's a real phenomena. So to me, if you're going to put it in the video game reality frame, that's what I would say is you have to join their video game, and their video game is a closed flat world, and it's kind of lame. Maybe it's just not as rich as the world of, or as rich as the symbolic world, which you know, boy, boy, doesn't that have a lot of more weight now? For those of us who saw it, we were like, oh, we see what's going on here, but yeah, a lot of people are going to sort of come to it sort of late, if you will. And go, oh, 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 right, I see what's going on here, because the world is very different when you connect it with symbols and you see patterns. Very different world. Your ability to evaluate things goes up quite a lot, right? Like your ability to just engage with something for 5 minutes and understand it better than the experts is suddenly on the table for certain people. But people who can't do that, I don't know. I feel bad for them. I'm trying to help. Watch Navigating Patterns. Like watch all the videos. Hopefully it helps.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm very grateful to be in the symbolic world. It's great. You you should join too, whoever you are. Join
Yes.
join Team Symbolic World.
Manual post. Anyone want to come and play World of Symbolism? I like it. I like it.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it.
You can join the book club. Although, yeah, we got to get back to games and build that game. We've
Mm,
got the virtue cards, so we can do something with
mm.
that. We'll get that project back on track. I gotta finish my stupid book and get it out of my head before it kills me.
So I had this other thought that I definitely can't really think about so much. So there's this book, The Geography of Thought, that you keep showing, and
Nesbitt.
it's a really good book. And yeah, Nesbitt. And I read half of it and so on, and surprise seems to have a very negative valency in the Asian cultures because of the saving face thing. So what do
Mm,
you think of that?
yeah. Oh wow, that's a good catch. Now I'm regretting
And
this whole talk
and
because
and 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 how that kind of reflects other stuff because they have the different focus on a lot of stuff. And I know you've thought a lot more about that. Uh, that stuff, the whole Asian and
yeah.
Western, Eastern.
Right. Contrary to Western Buddhists, and by that I mean everybody who didn't grow up in China, wasn't born into China for many generations. Contrary to what those idiots think, um, the Chinese are very hierarchical. The Asians in general, actually, right? They're very hierarchical, uh, and they're very much about fighting domicide by having you know where you belong and be happy there. Like very much, like you just Confucianism. It shows up in I mean this is to some extent, if you watch a show like Kung Fu, which is obviously one of the greatest TV shows ever made, um, and I haven't seen Warrior yet, which is Bruce Lee's version of his original idea, which they ripped off by making Kung Fu, although Kung Fu is still excellent. But if you ever watch Kung Fu, the thing you probably miss about the framing is that, he is an orphan and he goes to the monastery, right, in China and the Shaolin temple, because that's what they did, right? They also did that in the West, by the way. Monasteries took in orphans. That's what they were for. You didn't need social services. Right? We had better options, right? And you only pay 10% in taxes for all that too. Look at wonders the government has wrought. So that that makes him an outlier for the culture, right? Relative to his peers, we'll say. And then what they do in the Shaolin Temple is they craft you into, as much of a superhuman as they can, right? Not everybody, like not everyone in the Shaolin Temple is learning to fight. That's not happening. Some people are being happy sweeping floors and getting fed for it, right? Like because that's a big deal. Like maybe they can never do anything better. And Peterson sort of talked about that with the guy with the stuffing envelopes and stuff. It's a wonderful story if you haven't heard it. But um, they're very much like, no, this is the way it is. But then when we see it, we see these rogue outlaws, right? Who are, fleeing the tyranny of the East or something. But to them, it's like, no, no, tyranny is safety. Hierarchy is safety. This is the thing that prevents the surprise. And then we have controlled surprise, which is what they use gunpowder for, right? So, I mean, and I've made this argument before. Actually, I have this in my Western versus Eastern Buddhism video. They have this way that they use gunpowder to create surprise to use in celebration, so that they get their dose of surprise, but it's controlled, right? It's contained, but it's not so contained that it's not surprising because you don't know when those fireworks are going off. They never used it for guns like the idiot Westerns did. So maybe plus, maybe minus, depends how you fall on these things. And I think that's part of the we'll say core issue is that they have a very controlled way of living their lives, and the Buddhism in the East actually justifies that, right? It talks very much about not rebelling, but actually knowing where you fit and fitting there and finding a way to make that happy, right? So when they talk about a leaf on the river, what they mean is the rivers, the government, the culture, and the community and your family. That's what the river is. And then you're not supposed to fight against that. That's not only thing the river is, but that is also what the river is because they're very hierarchical. They're very fractal. It seems self-referencing, right? But if you understand the yin yang, it's not self-referencing. Um, it just seems that way to the Western mind. I think Nesbitt in particular does a good job of sort of maybe hinting at that. I don't think he covers it directly, although it's been quite a few years since I read the book. But um, does that sort of help frame it for
Yeah,
you,
yeah, yeah.
Gustav? Okay.
It totally makes sense about the kind of different ways it manifests, and actually it's deliberately given a place to manifest. So actually the surprise is to some extent placed within or like submitted to the rational mind, to the conscious, rather than the unconscious, which kind of makes it safe. Whereas, like, and you make the point that in the West, it's the gunpowder, right? The material, the surprise is used in this totally different way. It's used in a public attack to destroy your opponent.
Right, it's oppositional, right.
Yeah.
Whereas everything in the East is cooperative, and people miss that entirely. And I wasn't particularly we'll say eager to reveal, but this framing is perfect for that. So yeah, the East is a very cooperative frame. It's very much go along to get along, and the West is right now. I mean, people are just talking about opponent processing, and every time they do, I'm like, well, the good news is I know where you stand. The bad news is you're not on the side of good. And that sucks. Like I don't like it, but
Mm.
also I can't make you better, right? Like you kind of have to cooperate to make yourself better. I'll help you if I can, but like man, opposition it's not a good state to be in. All opposition ends in war. So I'm just not a fan of this idea at all. I think it's extraordinarily dangerous.
Hmm. Yeah. So I made this idea earlier, or I mentioned it about how when we do things, when we work, when we kind of manifest something,
Mm.
then we also generate these externalities that are invisible to us, that we're unaware of,
Side effects.
and side effects that keep building up and building up. And we don't see them until it's too late, sort of.
Hmm.
Right?
Right.
And so you're always living in anxiety about, well, not necessarily. You're not necessarily always living in anxiety, but after a while you kind of become a bit more aware that the actions of your past, the consequences are waiting for you at some
Hmm.
point.
Hmm.
And so, you know, maybe this um, um, resistance or dislike of surprise and of new things and of unexpected things, it reminds me of like some movie where you have like you have an old guy who has a shady past and
Hmm.
he knows that the assassins are coming to get him. And so, he goes to live on some island or in a tower somewhere, and he has to like know everyone who comes to see him, and he's got like some kind of insane security system, and just totally shuts himself off from the world because he knows that it's coming for him. So that reminds me of
Hmm.
where we are right now as a society, as a civilization. The other image that reminds me of where we are is like of a of a stoner at night, that you're like totally paranoid about everything. That
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
everyone is the cops coming to get you.
Yeah, it's a paranoia. Right. Right.
Yeah.
And paranoia breeds conspiracy. And what do we see a lot of, especially online? Conspiracy theories, right? Which is just an attempt to rationalize the things you see around you. But to be fair, I think part of the problem is side effects cannot always be attached to their originating cause.
Mm.
And that also contributes to conspiracy theories, right?
Mm.
Because you can like you can always say, um, oh, when they planted the flag on the moon, it didn't move. Um, you know, it therefore because there's no wind, right? Um, but then people point out, no, it did move, right? But there is no wind. Um, Obviously, they did it on a stage and they screwed up the set, and it's like, I mean, that is an explanation. It can't be correct for various very good reasons. Like the Russians would have outed us years ago if we hadn't landed on the moon. Don't be stupid. They didn't like us back then. They would have been the first to point it out. Um, it just turns out that another explanation is, I don't know about you, but like if you plant something in the ground, like a pole or something like that, there's quite a bit of movement involved in that. And that movement transfers to the pole, and then there's vibration, and that vibration does different things. Like it has side effects. And one of the side effects is it will twist whatever you've put on the pole, like a flag. And so the flag moves, right? So that there's two competing explanations right there. And that's what conspiracy is based on. Like we really don't know the cause of the movement. Right, but we know it wasn't wind. Oh, okay, but that
Mhm. Yeah.
that you're not saying much, right? And so you might say like, oh well, look, if the glaciers keep melting due to climate change, it'll desalinize basically the North Atlantic, and when that happens, the Gulf Coast heat pump is going to shut off, right? And this is actually the thing that I learned that really put the nail in the coffin for climate change. So the guy who came up with this thesis, which, as far as I know, is actually at least plausible, um, he was the first one that pointed out that I saw publicly. He said, "Yeah, the problem with the climate scientists is that they use 100-year data samples and averaging, and so their thesis is the climate has never changed 10 degrees in 10 years or something." And then it turns out when you look at the ice core data, which is the same data the climate retards are using, it most certainly has many times.
Mhm.
Like, this is not even an unusual occurrence. It's just that the way you were sampling the data, you never would have found that because you were using averages and you were averaging numbers wrong. And so that has a side effect. And the side effect of averaging the numbers wrong is that it's very easy to show climate change when you're doing bad math. That's all, right? And it's a case of how to lie with statistics. And then it's not necessarily that these people are, we'll say, tied to the evil globalists who want to control everything, right? It's that these guys really believe their own BS effectively, right? Because we're very good at BSing ourselves, as Dr. John Vervaeke talks about. Um, it's really not that. It's that they'll use any idiot to right? So the scientists fool themselves in believing something they wanted to believe anyway. They see it in the numbers, they get convinced, and the globalists, and a few of them are actually not retarded, they go, aha, we can use this to be better globalists and take over the world, right? That's actually what's going on, by the way. Like, this is actually easily proven incidentally, but nobody looks into this stuff. Like, nobody researches this. It's very easy to find the sequence of how this stuff happened and who believes what and where the dissenters went. And you can actually trace this down. I did. It's not that hard, but it does take a lot of effort. But it's very hard to get lost and say, well, obviously these things are tied together, and actually it's just one force at the top who wants climate change so they can take over the world. That clearly couldn't have happened, and therefore that's not what happened. But you don't know. You don't know it's causal all the time. And if you're not bright enough to figure it out, or you're too lazy to do the research, or you're just incapable, fine, fair. It takes all types to make a world. Uh, but you try to do that work anyway, you're just going to come up with conspiracy theories, and conspiracy
Hmm.
theories are going to make you paranoid, even if you weren't already. And so that's why they go together. But I don't think the paranoia causes the conspiracy theories. I think the conspiracy theories cause the paranoia, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I think, conspiracy theory YouTube channels in particular, or any YouTube channel that talks about conspiracy theories, is actually really dangerous for society, because it definitely increases mental illness. And that's actually in the psychological paper. Like, it's in the research, right? There are papers on this. Like, you do not want conspiracies because you will get more crazy people.
So, so what would you say is at? So what would you say the paranoia is about?
Well, paranoia has a number of aspects. So one thing is one of these things, not all things do this. We'll say in the psychological frame, it is reciprocal. So there's some tipping point, for lack of an easier term. That one's the most, we'll say, popular and readily accessible to people, and past which your paranoia generates more paranoia, right? Like, once you're stuck in that feedback loop, you're kind of on a bad road. Not that it can't be arrested, it can, but like, other people have to interfere to do that for you. You can't do it for yourself past some point. And there's a number of psychological sort of framings that have that quality where they're reciprocal. But paranoia is born of this idea that you're not making proper connections in the world, right? And so anybody who can't connect the world symbolically, they're going to be more prone to paranoia. Now, symbolic thinking doesn't fix it, because the other aspect of paranoia is overconnecting things in the world, and then being afraid of those overconnected things. So one sort of misunderstood aspect of paranoia, and you see it absolutely everywhere. This is sort of puzzling to me that people haven't figured this out. I'm sure a few have, but nobody ever talks about it. Is that you think, like, if you didn't pay your taxes, the government's coming to get you, and it's like, the you're just a number to the government, and the odds that you make enough money for them to come after you for tax evasion is vanishingly small. And this is just you boosting your own importance in the world. And the reason why that affects paranoia is because when you're overconnected to the world and the world has dangerous things, you are closer to those things than you actually are, right? In your head, your video game reality, we'll call it the simulation. You seem to be very close. Like, man, if that president gets elected, he's definitely going to throw me in the gulags, right? It's like, yeah, that'll make you paranoid. Like, if I thought that was going to happen, that would probably make me paranoid too, right? Like, they're definitely out to get me. Um, and so all forms of persecution are we'll say equally threatening to you, even though look, we had we've had a number of bad presidents in the past in this country, and they did horrific things to the country, and some of them definitely directly affected me. But I never got paranoid about it. I was like, well, there's side effects to things they do, and yeah, it would have been nice had they not done them, but also, what are you gonna do, right? And I was well grounded, so it's kind of like, well, it's not like this is gonna destroy me, right? And look, I mean, maybe it will, but also you're not going to stop it. So you can worry about it if you want, which that's another thing that increases your paranoia, like worrying about things that very well could happen, right? And not knowing what the odds are, or uh, spending your time worrying instead of preparing for them. Because there's been a number of things where people are like, "Aren't you worried about this?" And I'm like, I mean, I'm not worried about it. I'm prepared if it happens. And then I weather it fine, and they're like, "What? How did you do that?" And I'm like, "Well, I did this thing called being prepared." And so the fact that it was something that could have been worried about, I used that worry and turned it into preparation. And then when it happened, the impact wasn't as bad as it could have been, and people discount all that sort of preparatory thinking, right? They're invoking crazy, impossible terms like kayfabe, which is a betrayal of your ignorance of the world. Um, or they'll invoke something like fake it till you make it, right? Which is removal of your agency, right, and your place in the world. Or they'll invoke something like, um, well, this is going to wipe you out. And it's like, I don't like, I don't know where you're getting that from. No, it might affect me, but like, I'm prepared. So, like if World War three comes, like I have a plan already. I'm not too worried about it because I know what I'm gonna do. So good luck to the rest of you suckers. Does that make sense about paranoia and let's say the two aspects of it?
Yeah, kind of. I'm just thinking about what it serves. Like, what's its higher? Like, is it masking something? Is it protecting some higher uh problematic behavior or something like that? Or
Well,
or or is it just kind of this random thing in itself?
so it depends obviously on how you define paranoia. I mean, paranoia in the psychological literature is just not, you're already not good. It's already
Okay.
a problem, right? Just in the same way that worry is a negatively valence term, right? It's very negative. Um, and that's why I fought it with, we'll say, preparation. And I think that's sort of the issue, is that um, when you're engaging in something that you think of as worrying, what you're doing is you are putting within your awareness something and giving it a high relevance realization or importance score, right? And part of doing that, not all of doing that, is how connected you feel to that thing. And so this is often why people say, well, the dumber you are, the happier a life you lead. Yeah, because they have less worry, because they don't even see these things. And so the fact that they're affected by them doesn't bother them until and unless it happens, right? And so when you have a healthy relevance realization, or a healthy importance understanding or appreciation, then you're not going to run into paranoia, right? You're going to avoid worry. You're going to trade the energy of worry into energy of preparation, and then when things happen, you're going to use your stoicism for acceptance and go, yeah, well, this happened. I was as prepared as I could have been given what I knew, and I didn't waste my time, energy, and attention on worrying. I wasted it on preparing, which isn't a waste, right? And the thing that people will say can't appreciate anymore is that if you spend your time maintaining what you have around you and preparing for things that could happen that maybe are even fuzzy or unknown, right? Like, some people have like a bug out sack, right? Like, what's that for? Nothing specific, but any number of things could make it useful, right? It's like when you approach the world that way, that's a symbolic way of thinking, right? Like, well, this one thing attaches to 10 potential problems, but it addresses, at least in part, all of them. That's very symbolic, right? That's not this one-to-one video game sort of linear, discrete way of, well, I have to have a bug out bag with these 5 items in it if it's a tornado, and these 6 items if it's World War III. And it's like, no, just get a generalized bug out bag and it'll serve well enough for all of them, right? That's symbolic. That's a many to many sort of relationship. And so I think that's where, like, the stoicism, the pragmatism in particular, comes in really, really handy. Is that you don't fall into paranoia and worry. Like, those are not, they're things for other people. They're not things that you suffer from, hopefully, and this is not perfect, but it helps. It helps a lot.
Yeah, well, that's if you have integrity, but if you don't, then you're gonna be anxious anyway. And I think this comes to the idea that, um, let's say if you're, how do I put this? Like, if your spiritual identity has integrity with yourself, with the manifestation of your soul or something, if that has integrity, then you can't be humiliated to some extent.
That's correct.
And
Yeah.
so if you don't have that integrity, then you're always at risk. And
Yep.
and challenging someone, actually, in some way, like if you go up to someone and you pick a fight with them or something, and or if you make fun of them, you're challenging the integrity of that relationship in them,
That's right.
because you're acting in a way that assumes that there is no integrity. You're testing that.
You're trying to find the bounds of the integrity, right? And so what I would
Yeah.
say is, I mean, you've probably heard this, maybe not. I think Manuel and I sort of came to the conclusion that all domicide is spiritual, all of it.
Mm.
And that reframes domicide in a very interesting way. I get really like, wait a minute, what are the implications here, right? Because they're pretty significant. And without that higher frame, that vertical causality dimension, if you want to think about it that way, you run into a severe problem of being humiliated for just being wrong about something, being humiliated for making a mistake, right? Being humiliated for trusting somebody. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a quote from Blake Seven, which is, everybody should know by now, is the greatest sci-fi series of all time. And if you don't think so, you're just wrong about everything in the world. Um, but in Blake Seven, there's this line where one of the characters says, "He who trusts can never be betrayed, only mistaken." It's very interesting. I've always struggled with that particular line. And of course, later on, that line comes up again, and it's in a different episode entirely. And it's another season and a half out or something. Uh, and the main character goes, "Yeah, and that person's entire race has been destroyed." Maybe not. Maybe there's more at stake here, right? And so, sort of sorting out what that means, but I think you're right. Like, if you're we'll call it spiritually oriented or something, your ability to be humiliated is, maybe it's zero, like maybe it's impossible, because you just treat everything like an opportunity to maybe transcend your foibles, right? Because they've been pointed out to you. And humility is generally associated, we'll say, in popular thought, with high contrast, with absurdity, right?
Mm.
And we don't use it, that way exclusively, but that that is the way, sort of the extremes are expressed. And I think that's from the source, really. Although I'd have to look up etymologies and all kinds of crazy stuff. I'm too lazy to do. Um, so yeah, I mean that aspect in my mind is like super important. Is that yeah, you're if you're already, we'll say, humble enough, then humiliation isn't going to happen to you. Like it's not a gateway that's available to others to
Yeah,
get to you or something.
yeah. Also, if you have integrity, you don't have anything to hide, which, which, having stuff to hide, that's a pretty big source of anxiety for people.
Right.
It 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 influences their projections. They start
Right.
projecting that stuff onto other people all the time,
Hmm.
and it just, yeah, it's you shouldn't have stuff to hide. You can kind of get away with stuff, maybe a little bit,
Right.
but it tends to
Right.
catch up.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that again goes back to the anxiety. So, and I'm thinking of doing a course on anxiety. If you want to see a course on anxiety, comment. Like, write me a comment on the video. Um, be real motivated to do a course. Course is a lot of work. That's way more work than a book. Um, but one of some anxiety is just you have too much undirected energy, and that causes you anxiety, right? But some anxiety is, I mentioned this earlier, sort of the cognitive dissonance, where your unconscious mind knows something and your conscious mind is rejecting it effectively, right? Because you don't know what you're up to,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that whole thing causes an issue of um, conflict within yourself, right? Because one of the frames is you with yourself, right? Like, how do you relate to who and what you are effectively, which is not your identity. Your identity is assigned to you. It has nothing to do with you. Right? It has to do with how other people relate to you. But that's why you can't have one identity, because you can't have one type of relationship with everybody. That makes no sense. It's a universalism. It's universalism is bad. So um, that 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 conflict, it can generate anxiety. I would argue it's a different type of anxiety, but that's a longer thesis that's gonna go in a course
Hmm.
maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I've this idea of your integrity being challenged. That's like
Mhm,
it's a theme that I've been reading these stories about King Arthur's knights, and
mm,
that's a thing that comes up implicitly. It's like I've been reading, and it's a pattern that I've spotted, but they don't really put it. And it's like it also goes with this. It's like a pattern that Mathieu Peugeot has talked about the, I guess, the eating from the tree or something.
mhm,
So, for example, there's this scene where the knight is riding along with a hound, a dog, that he's hunting the white hart, right? This magical deer. So this dog has been given to him by someone else, and he's on this quest to catch the hart. And someone comes along and takes the dog from him and
mm,
says, "You've stolen this dog. This is a stolen dog. I know who this dog belongs to, and I'm taking it back to the owner." And that's a challenge to the knight's integrity.
mhm,
It's saying
mhm,
you stole this, you are not in good faith. And in a certain way, the person who steals the dog and who wants to return it to its rightful owner, who he presumably knows, maybe or maybe not. But there's this, you can't know what's going on exactly. It's this it's a challenge to the knight's integrity. It's saying that the knight has stolen the dog. It's saying that his actions aren't in good faith, in good intention. And
That's his
like, what do you
relationship
do
in
in
the
the,
world, right? That's his
yeah,
relationship in the world was not what he thought it was, potentially, right?
potentially. And so he also has to face this question about whether the thief's relationship to the owner is true. And so you end up in the situation where actually by stealing that dog, the thief finds out to some extent whether the knight had stolen the dog.
Mm,
Because
right.
if the knight says, "Yeah, you've You got me. I stole the dog. That's too bad. That tells you a lot. Or if the knight says no, give me back the dog. It was given to me, and you kind of explain maybe. That's like a and if you defend your honor,
Right.
right? Because in that situation, he has to defend his honor. That's really important because
Right.
you have to defend your integrity when it's challenged. Like you can't just
That's right.
assume that it's going to, just speak for itself. Like you are
Right.
that integrity.
But that's also, one of the things that's missing. I mean, some people, I haven't heard the talk recently, but that might just be, my filters. But people were talking about rites of passage, right?
Hmm.
And then King Arthur, those stories are all about tests, various tests. And it's like, why do you need these tests? No, these tests are vital. And like I'll just let you know. You talk to me, you're gonna get tested a lot. You're not gonna know it, and that's okay. Everything will be fine, right? That's how I figure out where you are in the world and what I can and can't engage in with you. And we all do it. We'll say unconsciously for sure, because you can't not. Like, you meet a new person, you just don't know what they're up to, right? That's why things like politeness are so important, etiquette, because without that, it's very hard to run these tests correctly. I can do it. A lot of people can't. And then they can't know, is this a good faith actor or a bad faith actor? Is this a troll? Is this person lying? Is this person here to build or are they here to tear down? Like you can't know those things without tests. And those tests are supremely important. And not all of them are, say, active tests. They're not like, I ask you a question about your role in a story or something, although that can be important. Um, but those tests are very important to being able to relate to people. And because we're in the intimacy crisis, we're not properly relating to people, and so we don't have those tests. I guess people always test my patience, says Manuel. So well, I don't know. That's yeah. And then
Can can confirm. I can confirm.
we've both done that to him for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, guilty as charged. And I think that's part of the issue is when we don't understand and appreciate that, when we're not, we'll say, able to relate to the fact that tests are required, because despite the fact that you think you're an individual and you can self-identify, and that says to the other person, A, what you think it says, and B, what needs to be said, that's where you're running into trouble. Probably both are overtly false. And but tests don't have to be active. They can be like, well, let's look at this person's history and see if they pass the test of something like a principled actor, right? And a lot of people appeal to this. They say, oh, you can judge a person by how well they treat somebody who can do nothing for them. Yeah, that's a test, right? It's not an active. It's not a test you can necessarily impose, but you can look at somebody's behavior and observe that, and then that is a test. It's a test of their integrity to some extent. It's a test of how they value others, or whether or not they just kind of throw them away. And I think that
Hmm.
that's fantastically important. It's totally missing from our society because tests judge people, and judgment is somehow suddenly evil or something, which I
Yeah.
thoroughly disagree with.
Yeah. It's thinking about this stuff has opened me up to like totally new world of chivalry and honor
Mm,
and all these kinds
mm.
of things is really uh really integral parts of having a hierarchy and a society.
Right. Well, not only having one, but like a lot of people like to analyze the hierarchy, and of course
Mm.
they can't, but they think they can, right? And it's not that you can't analyze any part of it. It's just that you think you're analyzing way more of it than you're ever going to be capable of, right? Like, I've run into this problem. I probably talked about this story before, but a very good friend of mine, PhD from MIT, like, makes us both look like drooling fools. Like, just why do we even exist with a mind like his around? Um, but one day I was talking about this is quite a number of years ago that uh, they had to sell the LA basketball team because the owner made an allegedly racist remark. This is pre all the dust up with wokeness, but it was one of the catalyst incidents actually that people discount. Um, but this incident, you have to understand, is happening at a level of the hierarchy you and I will probably never be at, right? It's in the aristocracy, the wealthy American aristocracy. And the interesting thing is, so he wanted $2 billion to sell this stupid basketball team. Now, there ain't no basketball team on earth, even in Boston, where sports is a religion, basically, that's worth $2 billion like that, especially not back then when that was real money. There's no chance. There's no chance that a basketball team can be that you can extract that much money out of a basketball team. Right? You're never going to get your money back. It's a very, very expensive. People don't realize sports teams are usually money losers. They don't usually make money at all. It's just a lot of money to you and I. So we think, well, they must be making money, but actually they're ego things. And, much in the way like person buys a fancy red sports car, right? And it's the sports teams are the same for people with way more money than you and I can even dream of. So what happened was, the former president of Microsoft, whose name somehow escapes me at the moment, was like, "I'll buy the team," right? And I was like, "This is so insane! Like, he's never going to make his money back." And my buddy, PhD from MIT, goes, "Well, of course he must have a plan for making his money back." And I'm like, "Oh, it's Steve Ballmer. That's his name." So, and
Hmm.
I'm looking at him like, you understand that Steve Ballmer is worth $20 billion and that $2 billion is 10% of his wealth. 10%. And of course, if you do any sort of examination of humans, you'll realize immediately people spend 10% of their wealth on luxury items all the time. This is nothing. This is absolutely nothing. Right? But you and I don't have $20 billion. And so to us, $2 billion is not only retirement, but fame and fortune for the rest of our days on this planet. And don't we wish we had that when we were 15? Right? But
Yes,
like
yes.
to Steve Ballmer, $2 billion is 10% of his net wealth at the time. And he's like, I guess we can resolve this racism charge by giving him what he wants, and then I get a sports team and a bunch of ego points with my buddies who have sports teams, or the ones that don't. I have a basketball team. You don't, because they're in limited supply, as it turns out. Right. There's only so many professional basketball teams, right? And you can't, at a certain point, you can't actually make more, because then basketball just becomes a boring sport because everybody sucks, right? So you have to have a certain amount of momentum of talent in a small enough container. Otherwise, no one wants to watch the sport anymore. And then you just ruin the game for everybody. Right.
Yeah.
See, I can analyze that at that level, mainly because I thought about it for decades, and I've had these discussions in the past with people that may be new to you on the internet or whatever. But I grew up in Boston. Like, we were having these discussions all the time, and more, way more, way more. You just scratching the surface, guys. Can't wait till you get somewhere interesting. I'll be there waiting for you. But like, I still don't understand, Bomber's reasoning in buying the stupid sports team. I'm sure there's probably factors that go into it that I can't understand, not just his ego or his willingness to resolve this racism issue, or, however valid that may or may not have been, right? Oh, and I don't understand the impact. And I don't even know the whole history, right? But was that the incident that caused, we'll say, the elites to pay attention to racism so much that they started dumping money into these things, and that sort of was the birth of wokeism to some extent, or at least the explosion of it? I don't know. A really good question. We can't understand the hierarchy. I mean, I love Jordan Peterson, but he doesn't even try to understand the hierarchy as near as I can tell. He just describes it and says, "And therefore," which, and fair enough. Like, I think, yeah, that's great. But like, where are you in it, and what are you doing in it? Right? Don't analyze it and try to figure out, like, where you belong or something. The hierarchy will put you where you belong. Don't worry about that. And your attempts to sort of rise or fall in the hierarchy will probably fail, by the way. Because if you actually pay attention to even, the Arthurian legends, that's what they're about. They're not only about that, but they're also about your role in hierarchy and your inability to just, well, I'm the prince and I don't want to be the prince anymore because I want to go out and have fun, or I want to go out and have adventures. I don't want to be protected at the castle. It's like you're just rejecting your role in the hierarchy, and it ain't gonna work. Right? That's not to say it never works, because I'm not a universalist. Like there's no such thing as never. It's not a perfect world, but it is not gonna work. And I think that, again, if you're properly oriented in the hierarchy, surprise is never going to be negative for you, and you're never going to be humiliated. You're always going to be humbled and learning, which is a much better way to be. So, did you follow all that? Did I tie too much together? How are we doing?
Right. It makes perfect sense. It's just
Okay.
the point we were linking it to was about the tests
Right.
and
Right.
the yeah tests.
But the tests tell you where other people are in the hierarchy or where they need to
Mm,
be, right? But they also tell that person where they need to be in the hierarchy. The question is, are they listening, right? And then if you pay close enough attention to what I do, particularly on live streams, you will see people fail the test all the time, and I will call them out for it. I will say, I feel like that should have had a little bit more impact on you, but I don't think you got it. Right? That's me saying you failed the test. You failed to learn from this test. Right? So just like a quiz at school, or a final exam, you got the answer wrong. I showed you the answer was wrong, and you glossed right over it. It had no impact on you whatsoever. Your error did not cause an improvement, and that's a big problem. So that's why tests are important, because they tell you where somebody is in the hierarchy, and they should help them to realize where they are in the hierarchy, or rather where they belong in the hierarchy. And maybe they humble themselves before they get humiliated, because I think that's also how that, it's not the only way that works, but that's also how that works. Like, it's very hard to humiliate me because I humble myself all the time. And I'm so well grounded that it's not going to be, somebody say like, you were wrong about X, Mark, and I'll be like, oh really? Does the sun rise in the east? Is gravity real? Like, what? I am wrong about things all the time. This isn't an interesting fact in the world. This is a given. So are you, by the way. So I don't know why you're pointing this out as though it's some big deal. It's more like a Tuesday. Like, what
mhm.
are we talking about? Like, I don't understand. And then the test is, if they fail to be able to explain to me where I'm wrong, they fail the test, because even if they're correct and I was wrong, the fact that they can't help me get better means they should have shut up. That's what that means. It means that in all cases, by the way. And this is, like, if you engage with fairy tales, you would know this. You would know surfacing knowledge propositions uh, is not a good thing absent the ability to participate in them. And so if you're surfacing someone's mistake and they can't participate in correcting their error because you don't have either the ability to connect them to that knowledge or the ability to show them that thing, then you've just made the world a worse place, like, all around. Like, don't do that. Hey, don't go to the boss with a problem unless you have a solution for it. Like, there's a reason people tell you that. That's not a business advice. It's life advice. You shouldn't bring up anybody else's foibles unless you're prepared to and able to fix them to some extent, or work with them to fix them. And if you can't point out, like, what they said that was completely wrong, that's a problem, right? That's an actual problem. You shouldn't be bringing these things up without a sufficient way for people to participate, because that's a flood, right? If I bring too much knowledge to you that you can't participate with, that's a flood. You can't swim in that knowledge. If I bring you just enough that you can participate, maybe there's water, but you can swim in it, and so it's not a flood anymore.
Yeah, that's all very true. So so what thoughts do you have on, let's say, a physical confrontation as a means of testing someone, like a fight, a
Yeah,
fist fight?
I think this flat world thing, because people always go to that. They always we're living in the age where people think power is top down from above and it's control through force or threat of force. And that's the way they talk. And if you listen real close, you'll hear that. You'll hear that in pretty much everybody. I haven't heard
Yeah.
anybody except maybe Jonathan Peugeot, although he uses power in a way I don't understand, to be fair, use power in any other way.
Well,
I mean,
sometimes it's money. Sometimes it's money.
right, but that's control through force because money is the force or threat of force. I could bankrupt
Okay,
you.
okay,
Right.
okay, okay.
Right. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but also, money is force, right? And that's why I told people you can spend
Yeah.
$1 billion and not get what you want. Like, that's pretty easy to do, actually, as it turns out. Uh, People spend money all the time, and it doesn't result in the end result they expected. And you know, sometimes somebody ripped them off. Sometimes they were just stupid and they bought something they shouldn't have, right? And sometimes they bought something they thought they knew what it did, and that's not what it did, right? So there's all kinds of foibles that happen there. But when you flatten force down to, we'll say, physical confrontation, you're missing all of the other, I would call them much more important signals and processes that happen long before that. And
Mm,
so there's a concept called escalation, which I'm actually terrible at, especially in that realm, because I'm bored and tired. And to me, if you can't see that I can crush you, that's your problem. And I'll warn you a couple times. And rather than escalate, I'll just crush you. Yeah, I don't. Sorry. Yeah, it's not a good on me. I get that. Also, too bad. It's like, I've been doing this my whole life, and that's how I am. Sorry. You have, yeah, I'm not trapped in here with you. You're trapped in here with me, right? Sorry. Yeah, and some people, I mean, it might be fair to call that ruthlessness or something. Yeah, I'm very ruthless. I'm very, we'll say, careless with the emotions of others when things need to get done. Like things need to get done, they need to get done. Get out of my way, or you're gonna get squished. It's just the way it is. You can jump in front of the train if you want. Train don't care, right? So the proper way to do this is escalation. And it's not that I don't do escalation, especially in physical spaces. I do reasonable escalation. My escalation possibilities are limited because I'm not a big guy, right? I'm super fast, but I'm not big. So physical intimidation to avoid physical conflict is less of an option for me. I do have methods of escalation. So what happens is you warn people off, like you say, yeah, you shouldn't insult my mother like that, or I'll smack you, right? And that can work. I mean, I can give you. I think I've told the story before, but there was a kid in class who was upset at me or whatever. He's a basketball player, 6'1". So he's like my father's height, and like I'm not 6'1", I'm 5'9". So, there's a significant discrepancy, and we're in high school. Um, and it was probably sophomore year. No, oh no, I take that back. It was senior year. Senior year, a little high. Um, what happened was we were walking to the classroom and he pushed me from behind. And I was just like, oh, that's the most uncool thing that anybody could possibly do. And so I stopped and turned around. He bashed into me because he's much taller than I am. And I said, don't you ever do that again. Right. And of course, I'm looking up at him like, don't you ever do that again. And he's like, what? And I said, you push me from behind. Don't push me from behind. If you want to push me, you push me to my face. Do you understand? And he was just like, what is going on here? Right. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, don't be a coward and push me from behind. If you want to push me to my face. So he pushes me and I push him back. And he was like, what the hell? Like he was just genuinely shocked. He's like, what are you doing? I could crush you like a bug, which he could not, by the way, but he thought he could. Like I was already trained in martial arts. I could have freaking broken every bone in his body before he could yell out in pain. Like, no way, kid. Right? So he went, "Did you push me?" And I'm like, "You pushed me first." And so he grabs me by the neck. His arms are about 6 feet long too. Runs me into the lockers, slams me against the locker, which really hurt, by the way. Don't tell him. It really hurt. I was like, "Oh, freaking A," because it's the lockers, they have these little latches on them that stick out. And these were thick ones. So it would, it was better than a thin one that would have cut me, but still it was like, oh, damn, that hurt, you know? So he slams me into the lockers and I'm 3 feet off the ground. Like he's just got me held up, like almost at his face height, a little bit lower. And he goes, what did he say? He said, "What did you say to me?" And I said, "Don't you ever push me from behind again." And he was just shocked. He had no idea what to do. Like absolutely none. So somebody said, "Dude, you could get kicked off the basketball team. You got to be careful if you get in a fight." And he just let me down because he didn't know what to do. He had no idea. So there's a good example of escalation. Like I'm just, I'm making sure it doesn't escalate actually by saying, "I'm not giving up. And if you want to fight me, there's going to be consequences." And the consequences were not me being able to damage him in his mind. Although again, trust me, I could have snapped those skinny little arms of his like that because I knew how. That's wouldn't have been hard. He had me by the neck. That is not a good move in a fight, by the way. Just heads up, don't do that. If that person knows any martial arts, they are going to snap your freaking arm in about 3 places with one very quick move that you will not see. You'll just feel the crackling of your bones. Don't grab somebody by the neck. Bad plan. Very bad plan. So for him, the consequences were, I'm going to get thrown off the basketball team potentially if I hit this kid or something, or if he reports me, which was true. He would have gotten thrown off the basketball. I could have gotten thrown off the basketball team. I didn't care, whatever. But he let me go, and that's proper escalation. So I didn't get beat up. I got pushed and I got slammed into a locker and my back hurt. But that passed. And he never screwed with me again because the consequences were you won't be able to play basketball anymore. And he didn't like those consequences. And so he was not going to fight me, even though in his mind he could have won. Right. And so, we both win. I don't have to break his arm or leg or smash his ribs into oblivion or whatever the hell, whatever attack I needed to do that I knew about that he would be totally unprepared for. And he didn't get thrown off the basketball team. It's a win-win, right? So there's your escalation. So long before you get to a physical altercation, there's usually an escalation tree. If you want to think of it, that was a bad way to think about it. We used to use escalation trees when we were talking about telephone centers, tech support. Right, escalation tree. It's the third tier analysts, right? The second tier tech support, etc.
Kind of sounds like you. It kind of sounds like you both escalated the chaos as you surprised each other, and just he shoves you from behind. That's like you must have like you weren't expecting that. I assume
no. Right, no. It was a surprise for sure.
Yeah.
Right, but I was prepared. Because I knew what to do. I was like, bro, like, come on. Like, you need to be honorable. If you want to do physical action to somebody, you have to do it to their face. But, like, that to me, it was just like honor among thieves, I guess. I don't know. Like, that's just the code. I mean, I grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts. Like, you do not hit somebody from behind. Ever. Ever. I've seen people who hit other people from behind and their friends beat the shit out of them. Like, you just don't do it. That is not acceptable behavior. You need to, if you're going to fight, you need to fight with honor. Period. End of statement. Like for real. Like this is no joke in Lowell. Not when I was growing up there. It was no joke. It's no joke in the mafia either, by the way. Right? Honor's a big deal. All right. It's no joke among the Irish either. Southie. Like it's no, there's certain things. And they're different things. That's where people get confused. Right? Like some people don't have that rule of don't hit somebody from behind. They've got all sorts of exceptions that are like, oh yeah, you're from behind, of course you did. Right. But Probably the Irish, by the way. But for very good reasons. The Irish are lanky little suckers. They whatever.
Yep.
They need sneak attack. They wouldn't survive without it. But like there's different sets of things that are honorable and not honorable. That's why you need the tests, because you need to know not only which things are in the honor category, but whether or not they're honorable, right? And that's relatively easy to determine. But the escalation tree, if you will, is warning somebody you should not do that, and then seeing if they respond. And then if they don't respond, then you give them the consequence. You should not do that, or I'm going to be forced to take an action against you. Right? And then they're like, whoa, you know what? Right? You don't have to threaten physical action immediately. And then maybe the third step is, I'm going to backhand you. And like I said it before, I'll say it again. I backhanded many people. Almost all of them years later said, thank you so much for doing that. I had no idea, how bad I was being in the moment, but that really taught me to pay attention. Yeah, I bet it did, because that's a freaking wake up call. And it works. It works really, really well. Highly recommend, if you know what you're doing. You probably don't, but that and usually when that happens, that's enough, right? Like one hit is enough for people, because then they have to decide whether or not to engage. And this is always the key to dealing with bullies. Bullies know, at least unconsciously, that if they fight you, no matter how weak you are, there's a cost to that. There's a cost of time, energy, and attention. There's always a potential that they could get hurt too. Because whenever you take a physical action in the world, especially against another human being, you can get hurt. Like you can hurt your hand, right? And so maybe the damage is less for you than them, but there's not no damage. So there's always a cost. And bullies often will opt for no cost, because a bully is based on reputation. And if there's the off chance that they don't put you in your place sufficiently, that they will lose their status. Whereas if they don't put you in the place they've assigned for you, or they want you in the moment, and nobody knows what place you're in, or maybe you're in a higher place and they don't do anything about it, they can always put you there later using other tactics. And that's why escalation is important, because I always used to escalate to, you going to hit me or not? And I would warn them, like, I take martial arts, right? Right? Because the key to a bully is putting doubt in their mind. In fact, the key to any escalation is putting doubt in the other person's mind. If you can make them doubt for a second that they will have a clean win, they won't fight most of the time. Most of the time, they won't fight. Very, very rare. Very rare. And the ones that will fight are arrogant, and that's your advantage. And so immediately, oh, I didn't get into a fight, because they're humble enough, right? They're aware enough about surprise to not be surprised in a way that is very costly, right? If they get into the fight, they're arrogant. Arrogance is always a good opening to win. Always, always. Arrogant people are fantastic. Any kind of battle, trolling, anything. I love those. I do. I love it. It's a vice. It's definitely a vice. I love to go to Harvard Square and talk to the Harvard PhDs in philosophy and shred them. I love it, because they're arrogant. I love to go to the physics department at MIT and just like find something they think they know about that they don't, and just go at it. And they don't understand the inherent advantage that I have, because they don't understand how it works, because they think the world is made of facts or something. And it's the lack of facts that you win on in an argument like that. It's well, actually, the observer problem means physics doesn't work at all. Quantum physics is impossible. Yup. Because it's all predicated on people observing things. And it's predicated on people observing things, because it doesn't work with a machine that measures. Right? And so there's a lot of physics things that can be brought back to observer problem. Now, the physicists don't think about this, or they don't believe it, or they're skeptical about it, or whatever. So they're very easy to get to win an argument with, actually, right? You have to know these little tricks. That's all. And then you have the advantage. And they can't dream you have the advantage because they have a PhD in physics. And I'm like, your PhD in physics is worth nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because I'm gonna slaughter you in this discussion for sure. You have no chance. It's too bad you don't know that. And it's too bad I like to win more than I like to be kind. So sorry. Nothing I can do. It is the way it is. Remember, I'm not trapped in here with you. You're trapped in here with me. But you see how surprise plays a role, right? They're not looking
Yeah,
in the right place. They're surprised. They're always surprised by a hole in their thinking because they think
yep,
the world is rational and rationalizable through particles. When I
yep,
know that isn't true, and physics has proven it,
yep.
or quantum mechanics has proven it. And that's also, back to surprise to some extent. The world is asymmetrical. It's not equal, right? And so the asymmetry is what causes the surprise. When there's an asymmetry between your model of the world and what the world serves up to you. And you can treat that different ways. You can say, "Oh, I just didn't know enough about the world, and therefore it's really not a humiliation." But maybe it should be because maybe humiliation is good for you, right? Maybe that's exactly what you need, right? And then there's the dichotomy of, oh, the world serves something up to me, um, and it I wasn't prepared for it, and I didn't know that that was an option, and now I feel like my whole world is not what I thought it was, and so I have a
Yeah,
worldview collapse.
and also just that, yeah, stuff happening quickly and being tested quickly means that, it's not gonna be a challenge of how quickly can you become adequate. It's like a challenge of how adequate you are in that moment.
Right,
And people know that they're not, and
right, right.
it's just it's a mess. So takeaways are that I should move with integrity, and when I'll be challenged and when I'm surprised, then it'll be okay. Or
Right,
not,
right.
but
Well,
I can't do anything about that.
integrity is part of what binds you to the world and prevents that domicide. And when you're not in domicide, not only can you have some integrity, but you also can develop more integrity. Like it just being not in domicide increases your integrity. And then in that, you're prepared or able to be prepared for more things. And that is what gives you the stability and the confidence to move forward in the world without LARPing or kayfabe or whatever nonsense or fake it till you make it.
Mm,
You don't need any of that. There's other ways. I mean, maybe you have to do that in some circumstances. I don't know. I'm open to the idea, but you don't need that. Like you can go through forth in the world with confidence that when you are surprised, you will learn from it and grow rather than it threatening your worldview. Because even if your worldview is wrong, you're connected to a world with such integrity that those bonds are not, we'll say, easily enough broken that you need to worry about it.
yeah. Yeah, it's all quite simple in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. So is it, are we feeling complete around this issue, Gustavs?
I feel done. I feel I feel done. I'm satisfied, happy.
Great. Okay.
I think it was a good talk, and I think it was a good topic
Yeah,
to
no,
start off with.
thanks for doing this. And if you've got another one, we'll do another one. Maybe we'll even actually plan it ahead of time and put it in the that everybody has a heads up on it or something. Because I think the feedback I've gotten so far is that these are really good talks, and more would be better. And you seem to be struggling with the right sort of topics. So I really appreciate the opportunity to help you explore this idea. And it seems like you've gotten something out of it. So that's also a gift that you're giving to me, which I'm quite grateful for. So thank you. Any other sort of closing thoughts before we shut it down?
It seems like a really nice uh proof, I think, that I hope to achieve one day, is that I can be pleasantly surprised and feel totally positive about it. That would be nice.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good goal. I like that. Yeah, we should end these on a, like, goal. Look, everybody, um, this was a surprise. So, I hope the self-referencing irony is helpful in this case, which, hopefully it will be. Thank you again, Gustavs, I really appreciate it. Let's, hopefully we can do this again, and, look, everybody, look, the purpose of these particular talks is to make people better because the world needs you to be better. And so we don't want you to be surprised in a negative fashion. We want you to be surprised in a positive fashion. So thank you very much for watching, giving this your time, energy, attention, which is the most valuable thing you have. And I hope you got something out of it like Gustavs did, and certainly like I did. Yeah, so many things I can't even, they're flooding my brain. So I'm in a flood. That's fine. Look, 7 p.m. Eastern tonight, I'll be doing the live stream. What is the topic of the live stream? The topic of the live stream is personal responsibility, which obviously I haven't been taking because I totally forgot the topic of my own live stream tonight. But we'll be doing that at 7 p.m. The Russian Revolution is coming out, I think tomorrow, maybe Sunday. I'll get it out there. Take care, everybody. Have a good evening or night if you're in Europe, and take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Thank you